So in this video, I just wanted to briefly introduce you to the concept of sections in MATLAB. And before we do that, it's going to be worthwhile to review the concept of a comment within MATLAB, since the syntax for defining a section looks so similar. So remember that comments in MATLAB are functionally denoted by starting your actual line of code with a percentage sign. And comments, of course, are the key, maybe the most key attribute of well-written code. And the reason for that, if you look at the third bullet under the first major sub-bullet, is that they not only provide value to your collaborators in practice in an enterprise environment. Of course, the likelihood that you would be writing code on your own is very small. So in real time, you will actually be communicating with multiple people, and writing comments, of course, allows you to write in our natural language versus requiring someone to necessarily interpret the syntax of whatever programming language that you're working in. But in addition to allowing people to collaborate with you in real time, of course, comments are incredibly valuable for when you revisit a project down the road. And depending upon your age, the utility of comments could, where I'm going with this is, it used to be like if I didn't comment my code and I were to just look at it a month down the road, I could just hop right back in and kind of remember my logic and workflow. But as you work on more projects in parallel, and as you get a little bit older, of course, the value of comments becomes just incredibly important. Oftentimes, even if I'm working on something late at night and I pull it out the next day, if I have just a spark of ingenuity and a brilliant way to code something that's very efficient but not very readable, I definitely regret not taking the time to put in comments after you spend that 5 to 10 minutes to catch yourself up of what you're doing. One thing that we've spoken of previously is if you're working in a high quality integrated development environment or an IDE, the actual appearance of the comments will be distinguished from your standard code in order to improve your experience, particularly in the MATLAB editor, whether you're working in the application or MATLAB online. If you were to actually open a new script, and I had it zoomed in a little bit on the command window here, but notice that comments actually appear in green versus if I have an actual valuable command, like maybe defining a valid command, defining a variable x equals 4, that actually renders in black. And that is just to make your life easier as a programmer. So when you think about an individual script, so really when you talk about the aspects of software engineering, usually most modern software projects are split across multiple files. However, even in a modern software project, an individual file is probably segmented into different phases, particularly if it's written kind of from a functional workflow point of view. And what that means is that your code will basically look like complete phase 1 or do step 1, complete phase 2, module 2. There's lots of different terminology for the individual steps that your coding workflow is doing. But you can kind of envision, as I mentioned there, like a block diagram or flowchart. Basically what you need to do is do the first thing, do the second thing, do the third thing. And when you're writing code, it's always good to kind of tackle those individual modules or blocks at a time, get them fully functional, and then move on to the next. So it's nice that MATLAB actually gives us a functional utility to allow us to execute a particular subset of a script at a given time. So in one of the earlier modules, we spoke of how a script is nothing more than ideally a collection of commands that are related together for a particular workflow, and how you could actually execute that script, which the MATLAB interpreter will just go command by command and execute or interpret each command by either hitting the run button on the actual ribbon or typing the name of the script onto the command line. However, if you have a script that is segmented into kind of multiple modules, you can use these things which are known as sections and only execute an individual section at a time. And the reason that that is so valuable is when you do that, if you're just kind of tinkering with or debugging one particular section and you don't want to rerun the entire code base, because that script could be very long. There could be a lot of values being written to memory, written to files, and so on. It might take forever. If you're just working on one particular block of the code, you have the capability to just execute that block. And as you notice, the way that actual sections are denoted in MATLAB is by placing 2 percentage signs adjacent to one another. So that's kind of why I went over the actual comments. I thought it was convenient since the syntax looks similar. So what we were asked to do is to create a script that consists of the following actual sections. Section 1 should define 2 3x3 identity matrices using the variable names A and B. And section 2 should compute the sum of the 2 matrices and store it in the new matrix C. So usually what I do here is I'll start and I have an untitled script here. But notice that the second you go from 1 percentage sign to 2, the green becomes darker than if you were to just have a single actual comment there. So that is telling you that MATLAB recognizes that you're trying to actually write or segment this into a section. You can put kind of a comment, kind of a brief one associated with the name of what your section is doing. So I'm going to say define 2 by 2. I think it was 2 by 2, or did I say 3 by 3? I made up the problem. You would think I would get that right. Identity matrices, A and B. And then in the second section, and it's always good to block this out initially, and notice when I created that second section, there was a blue vertical line that was drawn directly above. Again, that is MATLAB just recognizing that I have what is known as a section break here. A lot of your debugging tools for working with files with sections are here under the actual editor tab in this section portion of the ribbon. So what I want to do here is create a matrix C equal to A plus B. So the reason that I picked this kind of weird thing, you might say, oh, I don't remember back to linear algebra. What is an identity matrix? But an identity matrix is just a matrix where all the elements on the diagonal are 1 and all of the elements that are off diagonal are 0. But as we've discussed numerous times throughout the course so far, it's good to just get in the habit of being able to work with search engines and identify built-in functions that may be useful for whatever application you're trying to do. So given that matrix is set up to do computations associated with matrices and vectors, it's probably not surprising to you that if you just search identity matrix MATLAB, you'll see that MATLAB has what is known as the I function. And if you read this, it is overloaded as well, meaning that there are multiple ways that you can execute it. So if I don't actually pass in any values to the function, notice it's just going to return the scalar 1. If I pass in a single value n, it is going to give me an n by n identity matrix. And notice it's reminding you that the identity matrix has 1s on the main diagonal and 0s elsewhere. So in my code, what I want to do here is define A, and I want to assign its values by using the identity function. Just start to type it, and you'll notice that you get some autocompletes that are useful to you. So I, identity matrix, if it's the first one in your list, you can either tab in order to complete or double click on that particular function in the list. And then once you open the parentheses, you'll notice you get some additional helper recommendations of how you could use this. So notice that I don't have to enter a value for n. If I don't, though, I'm just going to get the number 1. We know from reading the help documentation that I want to pass in 3 here because I want a 3 by 3 matrix. So I'm just going to reuse that code and change the identifier to B, and I've defined A and B. Now I'm going to actually just save this, and I'm going to actually name it, and I will say, let me zoom out a little bit. That's what's going on here. I will call this the identity matrix script. Not very good convention for naming my files. I probably want to camel case them. That way it's easy to see what this is actually doing. But up until now, we've said if we wanted to execute this whole script, we could either type the name on the command window, which remember you can kind of just start typing and then tab to complete. That would execute the whole script, or I could hit this run button. However, if I only want to run the section, as we'll see a little bit later, and it doesn't actually make sense to do right now because there's only one section, I would just click on the run section. And that, in this case, the interpreter will only execute the commands in that section. So here, just to show you how this would be, if I define C as A plus B, and I will save this here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually clear my workspace, clear my command window rather, and then clear my workspace. So CLC to clear the actual command window, and clear all to clear the workspace. So the reason that I did that is I want you to look in the workspace now and notice that when I only run this top section, that only the values of A and B will be defined. And that's not overly surprising because I haven't executed C yet. So if I then execute C, I'll hit run section. It's not going to be surprising to me that the actual form of C will just be 2s on all the diagonals, because when you add matrices that are the same size, you just add them on an element by element basis. So if I have one matrix with all 1s here and I add it to another matrix with all 1s, I will have all 2s there. But here's an interesting thing to look about. Say you actually change the values that are being passed into A and B to 4. So this is going to create not 3 by 3 identity matrices. Notice if I now run this section, these will become 4 by 4. Notice that the value of C didn't change. It's still 3 by 3 because it was defined based upon summing A and B under their previous definitions. So what I'm showing you there is when I clicked run section, it only updated the values of A and B. It didn't update the values of C. If I want to update the values of C, I could either run the entire script or I could just run that individual section. So it's hard to see the values of sections when you're looking at simple code like this, but if you have like 1,000 line script workflow where lots of information is flowing in, out, being written to memory, and so on. And to run the whole thing from scratch takes forever. And you're really just focused in on perfecting a particular phase or module of your code. Sections are incredibly valuable.